History tells us a comforting story. It says the past is neat, linear, and fully explained. Stone by stone, tool by tool, humanity slowly climbed upward until it became us. But sometimes a single detail refuses to fit. A door that's too tall, a staircase that feels wrong, a building that makes you feel small in a way no architect's ego can explain. And once you notice that detail, you can't unsee it. The past starts to feel misscaled. Look at the old cities of Europe, not through the lens of tourism or textbooks, but the way a stranger might see them for the first time. Cathedrals whose ceilings vanish into shadow, windows stacked so high they seem pointless, doors that could swallow a modern person whole. We're told this is grandeur, symbolism, faith reaching toward heaven. But symbolism doesn't need hinges. Real doors do, and real doors are built for bodies that must pass through them. Now go back before photography, before concrete and steel. Look at the paintings of the 18th century, especially those by Italian masters. These artists were obsessive realists. Their careers depended on accuracy. They documented cities, markets, ceremonies, and everyday life with almost clinical precision. They weren't painting dreams, they were painting what stood in front of them. And in painting after painting, something strange appears once you stop dismissing it. People of different scales walk the same streets. Not children and adults, not perspective tricks, fully formed people, side by side, one group towering over the other. The taller figures are calm, composed, dressed in elaborate clothing. The smaller figures blend into the background, working, serving, observing. There's no panic in these scenes, no shock, which tells us something important. Whatever we're looking at, it was normal. If this were fantasy, it would be dramatic. If it were allegory, it would be exaggerated. But it's neither. It's mundane, and that's what makes it unsettling. The taller figures fit the cities. They align with the columns. Their shoulders echo the height of balustrades. Their heads sit comfortably beneath arches that make modern visitors crane their necks. Meanwhile, the smaller people look almost misplaced, like guests in a space never meant for them. The architecture doesn't shrink to meet them. They adapt to it. That raises a dangerous question. What if these cities were not designed for us at all? We're taught that ancient architects built big to impress, to glorify kings, gods, and nations. But architecture, at its core, is not about symbolism. It's about function. A door that is 5 meters tall is harder to heat, harder to open, harder to defend. A staircase with massive risers wastes energy and space. No builder working with limited tools creates inefficiency unless it's necessary, unless the body using that space demands it. For a being 3 or 4 meters tall, these proportions stop looking extravagant. They become practical, comfortable, logical. What feels absurd to us feels ordinary to someone larger, just as our own homes would feel cramped and childish to them. And suddenly, the paintings make sense. The social hierarchy depicted isn't just political, it's biological. The larger figures occupy positions of authority not just because they rule, but because the world itself is scaled to them. The smaller figures live in their shadow, literally and metaphorically, using infrastructure never built with their bodies in mind. This interpretation becomes harder to dismiss when we leave art behind and step into the physical world. Many old buildings have something strange in common. Their lower levels are buried. Windows that should face the street now open to soil, doorways cut in half, entire floors swallowed by earth. Official history calls this a cultural layer, the slow buildup of debris over centuries. But debris doesn't bury cities uniformly. Floods do. Mud flows do. Sudden, violent events do. What if what we're seeing is not gradual accumulation, but the aftermath of catastrophe. Imagine a world designed for giants suffering a global disaster, cities flooded, ground levels raised, structures damaged but not destroyed. The dominant inhabitants vanish. Those who remain are smaller, fewer, and forced to adapt. They dig out entrances where they can. They divide vast halls into livable floors. They rebuild stairs not for original use, but for survival. What we call renovation may actually be occupation. This explains the contradictions skeptics love to point out. Why are some stairs human-sized? Because they're not original. Why are some doors reduced, bricked in, reshaped? Because later inhabitants needed them to be. The city wasn't built wrong, we just don't belong to its original blueprint. And architecture isn't the only evidence that resists reinterpretation. Consider objects meant to be used, not admired. In museums across Europe sit books so large they defy practicality, tomes taller than a person, pages that require 2 hands to turn, text so large it overwhelms the human field of vision. We're told they were ceremonial, symbolic, meant to impress. But books are tools. They are meant to be read. A book impossible to read is not a book, it's a sculpture. Unless the reader was larger. In the hands of a giant, those pages shrink to normalcy. The weight becomes manageable. The font becomes comfortable. What looks absurd to us looks ordinary to someone else. Ergonomics never lies. Objects reveal the body they were made for. Weapons tell the same story. 2-handed swords longer than 2 meters. Blades so heavy that even trained modern athletes struggle to lift them, let alone fight with them. Historians label them ceremonial, but the metal tells another story. Nicks, rare, resharpened edges, these were used repeatedly. By whom? A normal-sized soldier swinging such a weapon would exhaust himself in seconds. The inertia alone would be lethal to its owner. But in the hands of a larger warrior, the balance shifts. The blade becomes an extension of the body. What seems monstrous to us becomes efficient to them.
Firearms raise even more questions. Oversized muskets with stocks too long to brace properly, triggers set too far forward, designs that make no sense for a human frame. The explanation is always the same: crew-operated weapons, wall guns, exceptions. But exceptions don't appear in every region, across centuries, with consistent proportions. Design consistency implies a standard user. Musical instruments whisper the same secret. Massive string instruments requiring impossible finger spans, bodies so large they dwarf modern performers. These were not experiments, they were functional instruments built for musicians whose reach matched their scale. Taken individually, each artifact can be explained away. Symbolism, ceremony, exaggeration. But together they form a pattern, and patterns are harder to silence. This pattern is not limited to Europe. Ancient Egypt presents perhaps the clearest visual record. Temple walls show towering figures beside people barely reaching their knees. We're told this is hierarchical perspective, a symbolic language of power. But Egyptian artists were masters of anatomy and proportion. They aligned stars with stone. They carved precision into granite. They understood scale intimately. If they wanted symbolism, they had countless ways to express it. Instead, they repeatedly depicted rulers as physically enormous, not glowing, not winged, simply larger, consistently larger. What if this wasn't metaphor? Across cultures, the same theme appears: colossal statues, oversized thrones, footprints carved into stone larger than any modern human foot. Legends of titans dismissed as myth because modern frameworks have no place for them. But myth often begins as memory. Even medieval European cathedrals preserve this anomaly. Statues of knights standing beside lions that look like pets, horses no taller than a man's waist. Art historians claim symbolic distortion, but distortion requires inconsistency. What we see instead is repetition, the same size relationships carved by different hands in different regions. At some point, coincidence becomes avoidance. The most uncomfortable implication of all is not that giants existed, it's that they didn't vanish completely. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers documented people of extraordinary height, 7 feet, 8 feet, taller. Official medicine labeled them anomalies, diseases, hormonal accidents. But many photographs show individuals who are proportionate, strong, and healthy, not warped, not fragile. What if these were not mistakes, but echoes? Genetics doesn't erase itself cleanly. Traits can sleep for generations. Recessive markers can wait silently until conditions allow them to surface. What we call giantism may sometimes be pathology, but what if occasionally it's inheritance? A diluted legacy resurfacing unexpectedly. If a larger race once dominated this planet, and if catastrophe reduced their numbers, survival would favor smaller bodies, less energy, less exposure. Over time, the dominant form would shrink, but the code would remain, hidden, waiting. That would mean we are not separate from this past, we are part of its aftermath. Which brings us to the question history avoids most aggressively. What happened to them? Civilizations don't disappear quietly, especially not ones capable of shaping stone on a continental scale. Flood myths exist in every culture for a reason. So do legends of fallen gods and buried cities. Maybe these stories aren't poetic exaggerations. Maybe they're trauma, softened by time. After the collapse, those who remained inherited a world too large for them. They adapted, they rebuilt, they redefined the past to make sense of their place in it. And eventually they wrote themselves into the role of creators rather than occupants. History favors the survivors. We're taught that progress is linear, that we are the culmination of everything that came before us. But what if history is layered instead? What if we live not at the peak, but in the ruins? Look at how we inhabit old buildings today. We insert floors, lower ceilings, add railings and elevators. We reshape the world to fit our bodies, not because the world was badly designed, but because it wasn't designed for us. We don't question it because questioning it would mean admitting we are not the original owners. The stones remain. They don't argue. They don't explain themselves. They simply exist at a scale that refuses to shrink. And every so often, when someone stops accepting explanations by default and starts measuring instead, the past pushes back. This is not a call to abandon reason. It's a call to apply it consistently, to ask why doors are the size they are, why objects fit hands we don't have, why art from different cultures tells the same silent story. History doesn't always lie. Sometimes it just omits. And maybe the most unsettling truth isn't that giants once ruled this world. Maybe it's that we've grown comfortable living in a place that was never meant for us, mistaking inheritance for authorship and ruins for achievements. If that's true, then the past isn't dead. It's all around us, in stone, in proportion, and perhaps in our own blood. The question isn't whether giants existed. The question is why we were taught to stop looking.